It's been 9 days since the raid at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. 7 days since fighting between Israel and Gaza began. More than 211 people have died so far. 60 of them were children. The violence has entered a second week. Over the weekend, civilians and international media were all attacked. All lines have been blurred in this fighting, and there are no signs of de-escalation. As we speak, the exchange of fire is on. Some countries are accusing Israel of genocide. Others are upholding Israel's right to defend itself. As for Gaza, there are broadly two kinds of visuals coming out, either rockets being fired towards Israel or of children being caught in the crossfire. What's happening in West Asia is nothing short of a humanitarian crisis. It's a crisis that has exacerbated the damage done by the pandemic. It's also a crisis that threatens to undo the peace process in the region. A full-blown war can still be avoided. But is the international community doing enough to ensure that? Also, what is India's stand on the conflict? We'll talk about all of this in our cover story tonight. We'll begin with a recap of what happened over the weekend, and we begin with Saturday, the intervening night of 14th and 15th of May. For the fifth straight night, rocket fire lit up the Gaza sky. Israeli airstrikes and explosions continued parallelly, but by the time the sun rose, 12 Palestinians had died in Gaza. Israel continued firing artillery, and Gaza continued firing its barrage of rockets. One of them hit a residential area in Ashdod. Another fell on a building in Ramat Gan. At least one person was killed in Israel. Saturday was also the Nakba Day. It's a day when Palestinians mark their displacement in the 1948-49 war, an event that created the modern state of Israel. Palestinian protesters gathered in the West Bank. Clashes with Israeli forces soon followed. In Gaza, a 12-story building was flattened by Israeli airstrikes. The tower had offices of international media, the Associated Press, and Al Jazeera.
We are from the AP News Agency. We have a lot of equipment in that building. All the equipment is there, including the cameras, the live and editing equipment. Give me 15 minutes and I can bring all of it out.
The world watched this tower fall to the ground with a common question in mind. Why was the press attacked? Israel says this tower housed Hamas militants. Does it have evidence? None that it has presented so far. Rocket fire and airstrikes continued on the intervening night of May 15th and 16th. At least 100 rockets were fired into Israel. Sirens blared all night in Tel Aviv and its suburbs. Reports say at least 10 Israelis were injured that night while running for shelter. Back in Gaza, Israeli airstrikes killed 3 Palestinians. Israel says it also bombarded the house of the Hamas chief. Headlining Sunday was a hit-and-run incident in Sheikh Jarrah. It's a neighborhood in East Jerusalem. It's at the heart of the ongoing violence. Sheikh Jarrah is very close to the historic Damascus Gate. It has a population of around 3,000 and is mostly inhabited by affluent Palestinians. But the land is contested. In October 2020, an Israeli court said that Palestinian families are living on land that belongs to Jews. In other words, the court said that Sheikh Jarrah belongs to Jews and not the Palestinians who live there. Palestinians appealed that decision. The case went to the Israeli Supreme Court and a decision was expected earlier this month. So tensions were growing around this case throughout the month of Ramadan. And because of these tensions, Israeli security forces banned the traditional Ramzan gathering near Damascus Gate. That's the reason they gave for the ban. They limited the number of worshippers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Protests followed. Israeli forces raided the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the 7th of May. The violence spiraled, the court hearing was delayed, and then on Sunday, this happened. 6 Israeli police officers were injured. The 42-year-old Palestinian driver was shot. Hamas did not claim responsibility for the attack but called the incident heroic. Overnight operations continued on Sunday night. At least 60 rockets were fired from Gaza into Israel. Israeli jets bombarded Gaza. At least 42 Palestinians were killed. 8 of them were children. It was the deadliest day in the ongoing fighting. But the rising death toll did nothing to stop the violence. These are images from earlier today. Israel claims to have destroyed tunnels used by Hamas. And what you see now are rockets being fired towards Israel from Gaza. This is what Gaza looks like after 7 days of airstrikes and firing. Funerals are being held daily. Gaza is among the world's most densely populated places. The strip of land is home to 2 million Palestinians. At least 201 of them have been killed in the last 1 week. 58 of them were children, 34 of them were women. Reports say over 1,200 people have been injured. In Israel, at least 10 people have been killed so far. 2 of them were children. As we speak, the threat of a civil war in Israel is rising. Over the weekend, police were seen scuffling with Arab protesters. There were demonstrations in Al-Fahim, Haifa, Sakhnin, Taibeh, Kalansawa, Jaffa and Tel Aviv. There were also protests against Israel outside its borders, including in Australia, Berlin, London and Lebanon. These images have gone viral. Also being shared widely are shots of people fleeing the beaches of Tel Aviv. Remember, Israel has numerous beach cities. It is also home to a booming tourism industry. The violence, the barrage of rockets and blaring sirens are scaring away domestic and international tourists. So clearly the escalating violence is helping no one. But who will end it? Not Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel. He says Israel's battle against Hamas will continue.
Our battle against the terror organization continues in full force. We are charging very heavy prices from Hamas for their unbearable aggression. The IDF carried out attacks on more than 1,500 targets during the last days.
What about Hamas? It says raining rockets on Israel is easier for them than drinking water. That's what they said. And like we've been saying, for Hamas, this fight is an opportunity to strengthen its claims to the leadership of the Palestinian movement. It suits them politically. Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammad Shtayyeh has asked the international community to intervene and stop Israel from, quote-unquote, committing crimes punishable by international law.
Israel cannot combine its occupation and crimes against us with having peace and security for free.
So what is the international community doing? The Pope has called for an end to the fighting. United Nations Secretary General has said that the hostilities in Israel and Gaza are, quote-unquote, utterly appalling. The OIC, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, held an emergency meeting on Sunday. It slammed Israel for what it called systematic crimes against Palestinians. The group's most prominent member, Saudi Arabia, condemned the, quote-unquote, provocative Israeli plans while reiterating its support for the two-state solution, meaning having 2 states, one for the Palestinians, one for the Israelis. The United Nations Security Council also held a meeting on the situation on Sunday. Nearly all countries in attendance called for an immediate ceasefire. And in an interesting break from the past, the United States avoided taking sides. In fact, instead of siding with Israel, Washington asked Israel for evidence to justify the erasing of the Gaza media building. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.